TORCH grant, so Texas Oklahoma Regional Consortium of Herbaria. So I'm going to start off this presentation just kind of going over some of the basics that you may already know from one of our previous presentations, and then we'll go through step by step through a record in Notes from Nature. I'll give you guys some common FAQs, and then we will jump right into it and start practicing together and go through some together. So this is a small group today, so if you guys want to unmute yourself at any time to speak up and ask a question, that's totally fine with me. And of course, I'll be monitoring the chat as well. This session is going to be recorded. If you probably got that notification when you came in, so we'll be posting this on our Armchair Botanist webpage. So if any of you have some friends that were not able to come to any of the training sessions over the past week or so, just let them know that this recording will be up there soon. So first off, I'm sure many of you have already visited the herbarium before, but this is just a sneak peek into the physical cabinets, what the specimens look like as they are systematically arranged geographically and taxonomically. And we're really kind of the gatekeepers of these physical specimens, keeping them safe and also making sure that they are available to researchers and the public. And one of the ways that we can make them more accessible is by putting them online so people can search for them over the web. So of our 1.5 million specimens, that's kind of broken up into 4 distinct collections. So originally, BRIT was founded from the SMU collection in 1987, and then a decade later, we received the Vanderbilt collection, and then most recently in 2017, we received the R. Dale Thomas collection, the University of Louisiana at Monroe. And then, of course, once BRIT was founded, we started our own collections from our botanists through exchange, etc. So this is kind of a quick step, showing you the quick steps how the specimens in the cabinet get to be accessible digitally. So first, we have to actually photograph the specimen in one of our light boxes. Then the label data is transcribed through one of our platforms, either by volunteers like you or by staff, and then eventually georeferenced. So if you see that top right-hand picture, this is a big platform where all sorts of collections from institutions are put online, but it's almost like a heat map. So these are all points in which there's some type of natural history collection or iNaturalist observation. So we want our specimens to be put on a map for people to search in that way. So today, this step, we're just going to be talking about transcription, specifically through the Notes from Nature platform. So transcription is just typing information from handwritten, typed, or printed plant specimen labels into relevant fields in an online database. So the only tool that you'll really need is access to the internet. So you could do this, we recommend some kind of computer, laptop, but there have been other people who choose to use an iPad and maybe have some kind of keyboard attachment. So I know some people that have done it on their phone. Definitely the computer, I think, is easiest, but that's all you really need to get started. So in those steps of digitization, the easiest step is the imaging. So it's really quick to take pictures of our specimens and put them back in the cabinet. But the transcription takes a little bit longer depending on the label. So over the years, we've accumulated many, many thousands of specimens, and these images, we can't search for them online. There's no appending data with them. So they're just empty images that no one can find. We don't know what we have. So through this grant, through TORCH, we're digitizing all of our Texas and Oklahoma material over the next few years. So The Notes from Nature platform is great, and we've been using that consistently for about 2 years. It was perfect, during the pandemic as a way for volunteers to help us. So out of our collections, we're currently doing Texas and Oklahoma specimens from our BRIT and SMU collection. So we'll be going over that. And then there are a few other projects in there as well that are not Texas, Oklahoma. So this is kind of a picture of the anatomy of a specimen. So each specimen will definitely have an accession stamp either in the top right-hand corner, sometimes it's in the top left. So you'll see in these two examples, we have an SMU stamp on the right, and the left picture has a BRIT stamp. There are also fragment packets. So these are just packets that are glued onto the sheet with excess plant material. This is stuff that researchers can grab from for any DNA experiments, perhaps. So moving down the sheet, there's also a primary label. So typically in the bottom right-hand corner or the bottom left-hand corner, there is a primary label with all of the core information for that specimen. So who collected it, what the collection number is, the date it was collected, the scientific name, location, plant description, habitat description, etc. Some other labels you may see will be mostly right above the primary label, but maybe around on the sheet as well, just depending on where there's room. There may be no annotation labels, there may be a few, but these are just updates in the scientific name. So not the collector. It could be the collector, but oftentimes someone else in the future after the specimen was collected returns to this sheet and may or may not agree with the original identification on the primary label. So that could be updated to something else, or that person may agree and say, yes, the original collector was right, and this is what this specimen is. And then other additional things you'll see, every specimen will have a barcode. This is the only data that is on these images. So this isn't information you'll have to enter in, but each specimen, each sheet will have a unique barcode. And then some collectors may include maps or photography throughout the sheet as well. So if we're just breaking down one of these primary labels, like I said, there's a lot of good information, core information on here. So specifically the scientific name, the location. So from a broad perspective, state, county, and then down to a really site-specific place where the specimen was collected. Habitat, plant description, and then the collection event information. So the date, who collected it, was it one person, maybe there was a team or a few people, and then the collection number for that collector. So this is the platform that we have launched our expedition on. So we have a set of a few thousand images that we've put on this platform for volunteers to assist us with this transcription. So this is the homepage for NotesfromNature.org. And I can put this in the chat. If you see in the top of this page, you'll notice that the URL is zooniverse.org/something something. If you go to NotesfromNature.org, it will change the URL, but that's the easiest way for us to get to this webpage. So don't be confused if you see Zooniverse, you're still on the right page. And under active projects, ours is usually maybe the second or third spot, but just look for torch, the word torch, and then the Texas and Oklahoma symbols, and you'll click into that project, which will bring you to this page. This is just a zoomed in image of our little icon, but under get started, there will be a box that says Torch Specimens from the Botanical Research Institute of Texas, Expedition 25. I think we're on Expedition 27 right now, so whenever there's an active expedition, it will be right there for you to click. And the first thing that you'll see, depending on if you are logged in or not, a pop-up will appear showing you the basic instructions on how to do the project. So we're going over that today, so we won't show you that bit, but just know that there's always tools on this platform that can help you figure out more of the instructions, and I'll show you that a little bit more later. But once you click into the expedition, you'll be given an image. And in the green square, you'll see a few buttons in here. These are buttons that you can use to zoom in and out of the image. So typically, since we're going to be pulling information from that label, the primary label, we'll want to zoom in to see that label next to our fields. And you'll see that you can also click and drag and move the image around to get that information visible for you. The first bit of information that you'll be given is the geographic location. So just the broadest information that we have. So this expedition is Texas, but there may be a few other states, but a lot of labels won't have the country specified on there. But so we can assume United States for these specimens, and likely assume Texas if it doesn't say, but it'll be more obvious if it's not from Texas. And then you'll enter the county information. And as you're typing in the data into these fields, you'll notice there's a drop-down list that will appear. So you'll know that you won't be misspelling anything. If you're worried about that, you can always just select the county that appears in the drop-down list. Additionally, if there's no county listed, there is an option, I believe at the very bottom, that says not shown. So if that's a possibility, that is a possibility. Once these three fields are entered, you'll click the next button and you'll be given the next set of fields for the data. So the first field will be scientific name. And you'll see in the green box on the label that I have that scientific name boxed in, so Camassia ciliioides. You'll notice there's also two red boxes. So Raf Corey, this is just the authorship for the scientific name, so last names for whoever discovered this species. So this information is stuff that we can omit. We don't need to include in the scientific name field. Additionally, we don't have to include the family name. Sometimes families change over time, and we have a database that we're able to pull this information from. So those are two things that we can ignore. We just need that the binomial, the genus, and the specific epithet. Then we'll be putting in the collected by information, so the collector. So in this case, this example, it's Roger W. Sanders. There could be a list of collectors, and you'll just enter those in separated by commas. And then collector number. So this should be obvious on the label. Sometimes there are a few numbers elsewhere on the label, but typically it'll be right after that collector name, or it'll be a little bit more obvious. You don't have to include the number symbol or any other symbol that may appear, like NO for number. We don't have to include that, just the number. And then obviously the verbatim date is verbatim, so that's pretty easy. In the green box on the right-hand side, you'll see need some help with this task. So under each field, you can click into this. And again, like I said, you'll get a pop-up that goes into a little bit more detail if you forgot what you needed to do in a certain situation. Correct, Wendy. So Wendy asked, we write the genus species exactly as it's written. If the botanical name has since been updated and renamed, we don't change it. Correct. So maybe you personally know that there's an updated name for whatever record you're working on. However, we do want to put the most recent name that's on there. So there may be an annotation label with a different name. So in this example, maybe there's a label above this primary label from 2020 with an updated name. We would use that name. However, if there's no indication of the updated name that you know of, you won't put that in yourself. However, if you want to come into the herbarium and do some annotations, we can do that. You'll have to talk to Tiana about that. But yes, just the scientific name that are on the sheet will enter into this field. So I'm going to click next, just to kind of go more into the scientific name. So you'll, like in this example, Liliaceae was the family, and we can omit that. So you'll know that it's a family if it ends in CEAE. And then in each family, we have many genera. So we have some examples here. The genus is always going to be capitalized in the first word. There may be some examples of annotation labels where, let's say in the case of Rosa elliptica, maybe that's on the primary label and an annotation above it may have R. Banksii. That R. is referring to the genus previous of it. So whoever annotated that would be agreeing that it's Rosa, but maybe a different species. And then other than species, you will have potentially subspecies or varieties underneath this level here. So to break it down, the binomial, it'll always be the capitalized genus, the specific epithet, second lowercase. And you'll notice in this example that those two words are italicized. So it's not always on labels, but you'll know it's the scientific name. It may be underlined on a label or italicized. In this example, we have an italicized Acer negundo and then a non-italicized L. for Linnaeus. So L. is the author of this species. And this is the part that we don't have to include when we're entering in that scientific name data. So here is another example as we move down into subspecies and varieties. So again, everything that is a part of the scientific name is italicized, and then the green and the Hoover is not italicized. So if this was presented on a label in the scientific name field, we would just type in Sinencio clevelandii var heterophilus. And omit the authors for that example. So I already talked about collector and collector number. I went ahead myself, but you can see as I'm entering in this data, I'm crossing it out on the image to show you that once we get through the collection, the collector number, verbatim date, the remaining primary label text will be the last bit for transcription. So anything that wasn't already included. So I don't have to repeat Texas. I don't have to repeat Jack County. I'm just entering in the remaining information on the sheet, all in green. At this point, there's no more next button. You have back, you have done and talk, and you have done. So if you're signed in, which I definitely recommend making an account, and I can walk you through how to get to that point in just a second, but you're able to give us feedback on this specimen. So this specimen was pretty straightforward, but you may come across that aren't. So you may come across some that aren't so straightforward, whether that be some obscure handwriting, maybe a question about which scientific name is the right one. So this is where you would let us know that information, along with some other examples that we'll go over. The back button. So you can definitely check what you've done before moving forward by clicking the back button. It saves all the data you've already entered. And then finally, once you clicked the done button, that image will go away. you'll be presented with a new image and you won't be able to go back to that image anymore. So it'll just give you the next one. Whenever you click the Done and Talk button, this is the screen that you'll come to. So you'll see that there's this box down here where you can enter in notes about your issues or comments about the specimen. So just a few FAQs, and then we'll go into Notes from Nature and get started. But my number one tip is to minimize interpretation and try to stick to verbatim when possible. So there are some obvious interpretations that you should make, like spacing and grammatical errors, perhaps, like in this example here. But an example of interpretation that you shouldn't make are abbreviations, for example. So even in that previous example, it says 3 mi N. You may know that's 3 miles north, but you wouldn't even want to expand that. Like just making those spacing and capitalization corrections for that example, but not, assuming miles. It may be 3 M period north. So it could be miles, could be meters. So just an example of an interpretation you wouldn't want to make. We get questions about missing information. If there's something missing, you'll just have to leave that field blank. So you won't have to put not shown or unknown unless it's probably county. That's a selection that you can make. But there may not be any other primary label data, perhaps. It may be just the county and then just the collector name, number, date, and scientific name. So you may not have to put anything in the primary label text. Spelling mistakes, you'll definitely come across them. You can definitely correct spelling. I can show you a few examples of that in just a second. But when you make a correction, we just ask that you use the Done and Talk button and let us know that you've corrected something on the label. Some examples of information to omit or skip, synonyms. So we just talked about updating a name, but there are some labels that will have an older synonym, maybe in parentheses or brackets. So we don't need to include that name. We just need the only updated name, the first determination. Common names. So some collectors will put common names on the label. That's an example of something that we don't need to include in our primary label text. Information printed onto the label and not added by the collector, unless it both isn't present in the data the collector added. So the wording was weird for that, but so that's a good example. Plants of Texas, we would already enter Texas into the state field. So plants of Texas, we wouldn't need to put in the primary label data. However, there could be some headers that indicate some kind of national forest, or for example, that may not be in the main text. So in that case, you would want to specify, that would be more specific if it wasn't repeated already. We talked about information already entered into one of the other fields. Sheet number, there may be handwriting around the label that may not be relevant to kind of the data that we need for the transcription. And hyphens, I feel like, goes along with some of the grammatical errors if it breaks across 2 lines. In this example, maybe specimen, may cut off the word and follow on the next line. So we wouldn't have to put the hyphen if it doesn't make sense for the hyphen to be there. So let's get into Notes from Nature right now and do a few examples. The easiest way to get good at this is to just keep practicing. Every label is different, so coming across more and familiarizing yourself with where to look for certain information is really helpful. So I'm at the main page. In the top right-hand corner, there's a register button. So if you haven't made a username, this is where you would enter that information in. And they won't spam your email or anything like that. So it's nothing too crazy to have a login. So I'm going to sign in. And you can see up here, I have a few more options that appear. In the active projects, I'm going to click the torch button. So just looking around this page, there's a few other things that you can look at. So in this learn more button, you'll see kind of a background about the project, etc. But I think a good place to look is the FAQs and useful tools. So I already had a few of these examples in my presentation that I grabbed, but if you ever have a question, this would be a good place to look at first, maybe before doing a done and talk, if it doesn't already appear on here. There's also some really good tools for transcribing. So one good example is the Harvard University database for collectors. You can look up different botanist names in here and get more information about them. There's also, let's see, it's not on here. The plant list is good. There's also, it's not on here, but World Flora Online is a great resource as well. And then at the very bottom, there's a few symbols that you can use to copy paste. Like, I guess the most common one you'll need is maybe the degree symbol. But I believe the way to type it in on the keyboard is holding the Alt button 0176. Let's see if that works. Okay. But I usually don't do that. I usually copy and paste it from somewhere. So if I go back to the main project page and scroll down to the statistics button, you'll be able to see kind of the progress for the current expedition. So we're about 71% complete, and this ETC, estimated time for completion, is in 9 days. Typically our volunteers are the first ones to let us know if an expedition is complete. So if you go to the homepage for Notes from Nature and you don't see our icon there, or if you go to our project page and there's nothing there, then the current expedition is all done. And so you can definitely email us and let us know, so we're ready to launch the next one for everyone. But you'll see right here, there's a retirement limit of 3, images retired, and classifications. So we have 2,000 images in this expedition. Each image will be transcribed by 3 separate people. This is just our way of quality control, and hopefully those 3 entries match. So once this expedition is complete and we get back the data, we'll get the flagged records of the transcriptions that maybe didn't match up. Either all 3 were different, or 2 out of the 3 were different from the others. And we'll go in and they're probably some of the problem specimens that people may have chatted with us about. So if you feel nervous about doing this process, don't, because there's other people that are going to be transcribing the same specimen. Yes, so the classification, so there'll be 6,000 total. So you can kind of see our progress here. So you shouldn't be getting the same images every time you transcribe. But however, if you select our expedition and you get a label or a specimen that looks a little tricky and you don't feel like transcribing it, maybe it's a really long label that you don't feel like transcribing, you can easily select reload the page and you'll be presented with a brand new image. So this is always great, especially if you're just starting out and you're nervous about how to do something. You can obviously email us, but that's another way to just get a new image and try again. So let me go through this one step by step, but a few more tools that I didn't mention previously. If you scroll down to the bottom of the page, there are a few options to help you transcribe, maybe a little bit easier. So I am in the dark mode. This is just easier on my eyes, but you can definitely switch the theme if you'd like. There are 4 buttons here at the bottom right-hand corner. The first is an invert image button. So this is typically more useful maybe with faint handwriting, you know, in pencil perhaps on the sheet. So this may help you see the text a little bit easier. The other button right here, the eye, this is the metadata for this image. So again, if you did have a question about a certain specimen, the best way to send us that image so we can help you out is to go here and select the image URL and send us this. You can also save images to your computer this way if you just love it that much. If you also want a place to save images, you can also select this heart button. Again, if you're signed in to your account, and you can, as long as these will always be available. So even if the expedition retires, you can still look at images that you've favorited. And then I don't know much about the collection, but I am assuming that you can create specific collections. For instance, maybe you're saving all of the Reverchon collections you come across. I think this might be your way to save them in more categorically. So let's start typing in the information. So I am clicking the image and dragging it up so it's right next to the fields that I want to transcribe into. So it is United States. We are in Texas. And it looks like the county is Bandera. So I'm going to start typing Bandera, and you can see the drop down already appears. Then I will select next, the scientific name. So this is a great example. We have a few on here. It looks like Tony Keeney, the collector, knew this was a juncus, but did not know the species. So there's a SP period and a question mark. Barney Lipscomb, in that same month that this was collected, helped identify it to Juncus capitatus. But there's an even more recent annotation, another different name. So by Neil Harriman in 1992 said this is actually Juncus filipendulus, and had his reasoning behind why he chose that species or that scientific name. So because there's no other annotations on this sheet, the latest annotation label is the scientific name that we're going to use. So that would be Juncus filipendulus, and I'm not including Buckley, and I'm not including any of his notes about why he annotated it to that scientific name. So collected by, we do sometimes have questions about this. Some people may be like, oh, so now Neil Harriman is the collector. No, he's just the identifier. He's just the determiner of the most recent scientific name. All of the rest of the information besides the scientific name is going to be on that primary label. So I'm going to go back down, and it's definitely Tony M. Keeney. On the text, it's all capitalized, but that's an example where you don't have to worry about keeping all of that capitalized like that. And I don't think these fields are case sensitive, but it could be wrong. This example also, he has some letters after his collection number. This could be for the institution, this could be for the specific field trip he went on, but this example, that's going to be included in his collector number. And then our verbatim date is obvious. So we got 2nd of May, 1984. So on the primary label, you're not going to use that July 24th, 1992. And then looks like this is the rest of the primary label text. So at the first low water crossing on FM 187, north of Utopia. So I corrected that spacing. I just put a space between 5 miles. You were definitely allowed to do that. And then at the end of Vanderpool, it's Bandera County, but that's already information that I've entered, so I don't need to put that in this primary label text field. So for the sake of this example, I'm going to click Done and Talk. And I think the easiest way to do this and still be kind of in the expedition is to right click on Done and Talk and open it in a new tab. So that screen will pull up for us. If I scroll down to the bottom of the page, here's where I can leave a note about the subject. So we get different types of comments about specimens, questions, or this even was super cool, like check this out. So it's not always something bad. Maybe you have a good comment, or maybe you've gone down a rabbit hole and found something super cool about the location or the collector. You can use relevant hashtags to tag this as well. You don't need to. But one example we give is, maybe the image is obscured or blurry. You could put image blurry or blurry image. And that is just a way for us on our end to click on those hashtags and see like a list, so to say. So I could look at all of the ones that were tagged as blurry images. And then you'll just click add your comment. And again, if you're logged in and you get a reply from somebody about your question, that'll appear in the notifications up here. So I have 4 notifications from our project. So I'm going to look at them with you guys just to see. These are just within the past few days. So this is probably a good example. So Jean Mason transcribed the specimen and had a question about the numbers. So she said, these Houston library numbers are a repetitive question for me. Am I remembering correctly that the stamped number 205, the reference number, and the catalog number are not collector numbers? I left the collector number blank on my transcription. So lots of numbers on these types of labels. So which one is it? It looks like all of these are catalog numbers. So catalog number B14990, that's our date. This reference number is just a reference to what Geo L. Fisher used to identify the specimen. So can't use that number as collector number. And then this one over here is stamped. So typically the stamped numbers are all catalog numbers. So that's also a number we can ignore. So in this, she is right. And AM Zuni is probably more on top of the ball getting to people's questions than I am, but is super helpful. So the reason I said to open it in another tab, just so you can easily get back to this page, click done, and be presented with your next image. Additionally, if I had clicked done and talk, entered my my notes, I could also go back to the project page by clicking this at the top. It'll always appear at the top of the screen. I can show you that in just a second after this specimen. So again, I'm zooming in a little bit, I'm scrolling around, making sure I'm not missing any annotation labels, zooming in, and going to start entering in my data. Denton County, and then scientific name. So in this example, there is an annotation label, it's written in, and it's just an exclamation point. This is just a botanist shorthand for an agreement to the previous determination. So this person is agreeing that the scientific name is Chloris verticillata. So I can enter that in here. Collected by is Billy L. Turner. The collection number 1625, and then the verbatim date. And then the remaining text. I have some locality, and then I have some plant description. There is a spelling error. So gorewing is probably growing on open limestone prairie, short stones. I'm going to say misspelling. I corrected gorewing to growing. Add my comment here right there. And then I can click back into the project from here and back into the expedition and keep going. So this, we still have about 15 minutes left for this allotted time. Are there any burning questions right now from you guys about this? I'm not sure if you have been following along in Notes from Nature as we go through. But like I said, the easiest way to get good at this is to just keep practicing different labels. Linda Jo on here is probably a vet by now. I know that she's done quite a bit and probably come across some of these more interesting ones.
Well, I have learned something every time.
Good.
You know, and I do have a question that's come up.
Yeah.
On a lot of the labels, it will have like location and then whatever the collector puts in there, or it'll have locality or associated plants. Do we write them down and like put a colon after and include that heading, or just assume that people will know what it is? Am I making myself clear?
Yeah. So in this example, you wouldn't, in this example, you probably wouldn't need to put locality : San Angelo in the primary label text, especially because there's nothing else on here. You could just put San Angelo, but I think I know what you're talking about. There are some labels that do have like associated species : and then list them, habitat, and then list it. I think in that case, you can definitely enter that data in to specify, because you're right, it's all being lumped into one field. Eventually, once it's cleaned up and on our end, we'll separate it out into the correct fields. But if there is some kind of heading like that, that does help to put them in the right fields, if that makes sense. However, I mean, this is one example where you wouldn't, but I know there may be some examples where it'd be a little bit more clear to put that in as more of a separator of the information. I have a question. Oh, sorry, Linda Jo, I muted you on accident. Michelle, there's no silly questions. Asked, what do you do when you're done? Won't a new specimen pop up when you click done? Yes. So this specimen popped up for me, but I don't have to transcribe it. I can really, click out of this wherever. So even if you halfway transcribe and don't click done, that information won't be saved. It'll just be kept in the queue for people to pick up. So I don't have to transcribe this. Once I'm done with my last specimen and I click done, then you're right, I can just log out or close the page. Gonna reload to see if I can get another good example before we head out. This is lovely, the color preserved so well. Okay, here's a good one, a long one. I I can start typing it in, and if you guys have any more questions, please feel free to ask those. Or call me out if I start typing something in incorrectly. So we have Steve L. Orzel and Edwin Bridges. So like I said, in a multiple collector case, we would just separate it with commas. So if you click need some help with this task, it'll let you know that information. So if there are multiple collectors, separate the names with a comma.
Okay, in the case of like David and Pat Lewis,
You could keep.
Do you keep the and or
Yeah. So I think in the FAQs, and I could be wrong because I mean, we've done this for so long and have, modified things over time. There are multiple collectors, and then there's also maybe a collection team. So maybe in Dave and Pat Lewis, you could keep that Dave and Pat Lewis as is. There's also John and Connie Taylor. So those are examples where you could keep it, and it's more of a collection team rather than separate collectors in that case. And I can check the FAQs again, but I think that's what we had decided would be the best way to transcribe it. Oh, and I didn't finish. Edwin L. Bridges, there we go. Okay, this is a little long. Again, the ones like these are probably going to be the last to transcribe once the images dwindle down for the remaining queue. This field at the end is great because this is going to be a lot of information, so I can easily make this text box a little bit bigger if I need to be able to see all of it a little bit easier, whatever I'm typing in. State Park. So this is probably one of the longer ones that you'll have to type in. For the most part, these have been pretty, the data's been limited, which may or may not be a good thing. It's easier to transcribe. I'm just copying that degree symbol in there. 97. So going forward, like I said, there are a few ways that you can get in contact with us for help with your questions. So the Dun and Talk email, you can email us at herbarium@brit.org. And like I mentioned, having that image URL is really helpful for us to be able to look at the issue that you had and be able to more easily answer your questions. Additionally, every Thursday at noon, we have an armchair botany Zoom meeting, very informal. We basically just talk about plants and go over any questions that people have had or anything cool. Occasionally we do presentations on various subjects. We'll have maybe someone come and present to us. So just a way for everyone who is transcribing virtually to be able to have some place where we can get together every now and then to discuss plants. I'm almost done.